Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Old Heroes, written by Feck Yea, UK. The space battle lasted barely a day. The Bannock fleet, laughably outmatched by the Valakor, fought valiantly, but was nonetheless annihilated. Multiple shots from even the most powerful Bannock ships had simply bounced off the Valakor ships' shields, whilst even the glancing hit from the Valakor was almost instantaneous death and destruction for the Bannock ships. The war against the Valakor had been raging for the past 5 years. The Galactic Federation members, all joining in the defense of the Federation, had fought furiously against the Valakor, united as never before. But one by one, the member races were subjugated, or worse. With the space battle over, the Valakor had already begun landing troops onto the Bannock homeworld, and a massive planet-wide firefight had developed. Every street was a battleground. Bannock soldiers hurling themselves time and again at the invader to buy just a little more time for their faint hope of a miracle. Desperate to reach the central museum, Tarek moved from cover to cover, dodging enemy weapons fire. His purpose was the last roll of the dice for his people. Trusting in his people's favors, he made his frantic journey to the museum. It was his people's oldest legend. His sole purpose was the oldest and most revered relic known to Bannock history. His task was to try and use it to bring forth a miracle, a desperate gambit to return the heroes from eons before, those that had originally freed the galaxy from the Valakor, those who had originally freed the Bannock and many other races and forced the Valakor from this galaxy. Without a word, Tarek moved to a run towards his destination. He made it just as a weapon blast hit the masonry where only a second earlier his head had been. The soldiers outside the museum, as one, closed rank and increased their rate of fire, valiantly trying to buy Tarek as much time as possible to complete his task. He pushed open the reinforced doors and finally made it to the exhibit. He entered the security code given to him by the First Minister herself, and the status field collapsed, and the Tarek reached out and grabbed the relic before it could drop to the floor. Holding the relic, he felt hopeless. Since the return of the Valakor, his people's greatest minds had tried to unlock the device, and before them, over the eons, many sages and scholars had tried to learn the relic's secrets. None of them had succeeded. And now he was tasked with not only figuring out the relic, but using it to call forth the heroes of old to aid his people in their greatest hour of need. He felt completely ridiculous at the thought. It had been tens of thousands of years, according to the texts, since the relic was gifted to his people for the very reason they were unable to get the relic to perform. He flipped the relic over to inspect the outside of it. He tried to pry it open at the seams, but to no avail. The sound of battle coming ever closer, he began pressing what he assumed was a screen. But nothing happened. The Valakor were now inside the museum. How many of his people had been lost, buying him these precious seconds, and he had wasted them. This was pointless. In a fit of rage, Tarek smacked his hand down on the relic, and a sin worthy of imprisonment only hours before. The relic came to life. The screen now had flashing cursor in the center, and a few seconds later, in a strange alien language, words began to appear. Suddenly, several Bannock soldiers burst into the room and began barricading the door. Tarek moved behind the pillar and held the relic close to his chest. He looked down at the line of strange alien text and began to trace what he presumed were letters with his fingers. The text began to change, and before his eyes, the strange alien language was converted into an old dialect of Balakan, which Tarek at first had trouble translating. The sentence read, "We are coming. Hold on." The sound of the Valakor weapons fire started coming from the other side of the door. Tarek moved to the nearest soldier, and still gripping the relic, asked for the soldier's sidearm so that he could at least die with dignity fighting alongside his fellows. The soldiers all looked exhausted, but also filled with a strange resolve to take as many Valakor with them to the afterlife as they could. The Valakor were now directly targeting the door. A strange sense of sadness overcame Tarek at the thought of those Bannock soldiers who had only moments before been defending this historic building. Slowly, the doors were beginning to buckle under the onslaught, and Tarek thought that he could hear the laughing of the Valakorian soldiers. This filled him with anger and rage so primal he wanted nothing more than to kill them by any means possible. It was at this point that the relic in Tarek's grip made a loud beep noise, and Bannock soldiers, all as one, turned to look at Tarek with hope in their eyes. Tarek looked down and watched as the text disappeared and a line of words appeared. He touched the screen, and as before, the strange alien language was converted to ancient Balakan. Tarek read the new sentence aloud. Humanity always keeps its promises. We are here. What's a human? Inquired one of the soldiers before another volley of fire from the other side of the buckling doors occupied her attention. The firing against the door suddenly ceased a few seconds later. The sound of heavy boots running down the corridor could now be heard. Now cheers and shouts of glee came from outside, and after several minutes, the soldiers of Tarek all cautiously looked out of the window, and to their amazement, the Valor Corps were all running headlong to their dropships, weapons and equipment being discarded as they ran to try and increase their speed. Vatican soldiers were chasing them all the way, firing into them all the while in a desperate attempt for not only revenge, but justice. What's going on? Asked one of the soldiers. I don't know, but I think we should go outside, said Tarek, still clutching the relic in his hands. The soldiers and Tarek cleared the barricade of the exhibit door and then forced the door open. They made their way nervously down to the exit and watched as Valor dropships took off and raced spacewards with incredible speed. At this point, Tarek moved outside of the museum and was astounded to see Bannock soldiers were standing out of their defensive positions and were all looking skywards, cheering. Tarek followed their gaze and saw the Valor ships in orbit still, but there were significantly fewer of them now. And after a few seconds, his eyes adjusted to the light. He could see several that weren't ships anymore, but floating debris. Where he thought was a ship only moments earlier, were now a mangled mess of metal blown into pieces. In awe, he stood watching as Valor capital ships, which appeared to be firing all its engines at once, be hit by something and immediately explode. Moving quickly, Tarek made for the Capitol building and for the First Minister's office, praying that it was still in one piece. Arriving at the steps of the Capitol building, Tarek was shocked and brought to tears by the many, many bodies of the Bannock soldiers who had given their lives to defend this proud symbol of Bannock democracy. Making his way inside, the main reception hall had been turned into a makeshift hospital. The amount of wounded soldiers and civilians alike brought tears to Tarek's eyes, and he had to find out what was going on in space above the planet. Tarek moved past the wounded and the caregivers and made his way to the First Minister's office, which was in some disarray. As Tarek entered the office, he found the First Minister unharmed, surrounded by military and civilian leaders alike, watching the Planetary Defense Satellite's video feed. A new fleet of ships had arrived, unlike any that no living Balakan had seen before. The Valor ships were desperately trying to leave orbit and appeared desperate to avoid these vessels. Those that made it out of orbit were firing desperately at the ships in a bid to escape, but were having the same effect of our ships were having against them only hours earlier. Valor weapons bouncing harmlessly off the newcomers' ship shields, all the while being utterly annihilated by return fire. Once the ship's battle was over, the newcomers turned their attention to our planet, where moments earlier there had been Valor soldiers trying to defend themselves. A flash of light, and they were gone. In mere minutes, there were no living Valor alive in our system. The relic still in Tarek's grip beeped once again. Its sound, being the only noise, broke the spell of amazement, and everyone in the office turned to look at him. I got it to work, Tarek said weakly, holding it out so everyone could see the new line of text appeared. He looked down, and in unison so did everyone else in the room. Moving closer and climbing over each other to look at the writing, and again, Tarek pressed the screen to translate the text. Everyone leaned closer still. What does it say? Can you read it? Asked the First Minister. I can, and it asks if they can visit and say hello, said Tarek, slightly taken aback. Everyone in the room seemed slightly mystified that a race that was so powerful was asking politely for permission to visit. Tarek immediately looked to the First Minister, whose face had gone an ashen color. They were not able to deny a request from such a powerful race, and what military assets they had left were not going to stand a chance against these newcomers, who had so efficiently taken care of the Valor who only hours earlier had pushed aside the Bannock military. Yes, by all means, the First Minister said in a very nervous voice, speaking to Tarek directly. Contact them and let them know that we will receive them, she said, trying to sound authoritative, despite the look of sheer terror on her face. The generals standing behind her all shook their heads collectively, knowing very well that they may well be jumping out of a burning building and straight into hell itself. I don't know how, Tarek admitted. The message appears, and I just press here, and it translates the alien language to Old Balakan. Before Tarek could finish speaking, there was a brilliant white flash of light, and where previously there was an empty space in the office, now stood two bipeds wearing white robes. Tarek was surprised at how similar they appeared in form of the Bannock, and he assumed one was female and the other male. Both looked like young adults, and they both had wide smiles on their faces and seemed genuinely excited to be here. There was a dumb silence, and no one spoke, and the awkward silence continued for a few minutes. Finally, Tarek moved forward and bowed. "Hello, I'm Tarek, and it was me that activated the relic." Tarek stood with the relic, offering it to the newcomers as some form of explanation. He didn't know what else to do, and going by the looks on the other Vatican faces, neither did they. The male newcomer had moved across the room and was looking out the window and said something in a strange language to his female companion. His facial expression had changed from an excited smile to a somber look of sorrow. The female's facial expression also changed, and a look of concern appeared on her face. The female newcomer took the relic and examined it, her fingers dancing across the relic screen before she handed it back to Tarek. The female spoke once more, but this time in fluent Vatican. "Hello, Tarek," the female said. Several deep intakes of breath all happened at the same time. "My name is Evie, and this is Jacob. We are humans from the planet Earth, and we received your call for help. We apologize for not getting here sooner. It is very nice to meet you and to make the acquaintance of your species once again." "Welcome to Vatican," the First Minister announced with a ceremonial flourish and rather more pomp than Tarek thought was necessary. "We thank you for your help with the Valicor. We are grateful beyond words." Tarek's mind was racing. His brain finally caught up with the events. "Again, you are the ones that defeated the Valicor thousands of years ago and freed us and the other races," he hesitated. May I ask how old you are?" The human known as Evie smiled at Tarek. "That is correct. We are from the remote part of the galaxy, so we were afforded a chance to develop in peace and grow. When the Valicor finally located us, we were far superior in technology and numbers for them, and we fought the Valicor, pushing them from this galaxy. We left good communication devices on all worlds we liberated, with instructions to call us if the Valicor ever returned," she explained. "Oh, I'm approaching my 200,000th birthday next month," she said rather nonchalantly. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.